Hey guys, Mike in the Woods here. So, as you've seen recently, I went backpacking on the McCrae Lake North Trail, and like most of my solo trips, it wound up not going according to plan. I mean, frankly, it's alright though. It actually wound up being a pretty solid overnighter, even though I only did 16 kilometers, which is about half of what I intended to do on that trip. And, as always, I thought it would be worthwhile to dissect what happened, take a look at what worked and what didn't, so that you guys can learn from my experiences. So subscribe if you're new to the channel, and let's take a look. So by far, the biggest pain point on that trip was trying to get that damn campfire going once I got to camp. I guess it's a combination of the fact that it's like early spring when temperatures are just getting above freezing, so everything's melting, and it had been snowing and raining recently, especially early on in that hike. You see me wearing my rain poncho, and all of the firewood, all of the dead standing, all of the dead branches on the trees were all waterlogged. So trying to get that stuff lit and actually burning was a strong exercise in frustration. Even like the thin little tiny twigs were waterlogged. And part of what caused so much pain trying to get that campfire started is that while I did bring tinder, I really only brought stuff like toilet paper and dryer lint as tinder. So that stuff, it catches a spark like no tomorrow, but it burns for like 20 seconds and then it's depleted. So if I'm trying to use that to get wet twigs started, that peters out before anything can even catch. So one of the lessons that I learned on this trip is that I need some more solid fire starters, like some actual fire starters. So actually what I did is I actually put some of these in my kit now as a combination of my tinder and something that'll last a little bit in order to get firewood going in that scenario. Basically, if I need to get tinder out of this, I just mash up the end and pull it apart until it's nice and fluffy and can catch a spark. While I did eventually get one going on that trip, man, I'm not exaggerating when I say it took me probably like 4 hours and 4 or 5 attempts to get it going. So one of the other things as it relates to that is, as my backup, I always bring some sort of stove on my trips now. And what I decided to bring for winter use was a twig stove. You tell me how, if I'm having trouble getting a regular campfire going because the firewood's wet, how the twig stove will help me in that scenario. Moral of the story is that it doesn't. So that's one thing that really became clear, is that while twig stoves are good in certain situations, I decided instead to switch to a alcohol stove setup for winter use. Alright, so now instead of that twig stove, I'm rocking a alcohol stove. Alright, so just a bottle of fuel. I got about 300 milliliters in there with a total possible capacity of half a liter, and my little alcohol stove. In the situation that I faced on that last trip, this would have saved me a lot of frustration. If I had it went just straight to the alcohol stove, I could have boiled up some snow, I could have cooked all my food, and had an easygoing night and been far less stressed out. But that's what the point of these trips are: figure out what works, what doesn't, and make changes as necessary. So switching gears a little bit, one of the other things, it's not something that I didn't know, but it definitely made itself very clear on this trip, is that not all trail miles are created equal. With that pack that I have there, I could probably do a 20-kilometer day on flat, relatively even, nice and dry terrain. However, the trail that I hiked for this trip was not that. It was very hilly, not necessarily tall climbs, but some steep ones and frequent climbs. A lot of the trail was really soggy because, like I said, everything's melting and it had been snowing / raining that day. When my foot's sinking in, like, I need to be careful I'm not gonna get a soaker. It's that deep. So there's that, but then part of the trail where people have been walking is all packed down and it's super icy, so that also creates a lot of strain. You might not seem it if you're only doing short distances, but when you're doing a long hike like that, trying not to slip and fall and die on icy trails, especially when you don't have micro spikes, because the ones that I have don't fit over my boots, that takes a lot out of you. So that 8-kilometer hike that I wound up doing on the way into camp, that felt like basically like a 30-kilometer hike, right? So when you're planning your daily distance for how far that you're gonna go in a given day, the trail conditions and the elevation gain matters a lot. Also, one weird thing that worked its way into this trip was morning frost. So as you saw, I wound up sleeping cowboy camp style open sky overnight since there wasn't supposed to be any precipitation. It was clear skies. I could see the stars while I was sleeping. But when I woke up, all around me, the foot of my sleeping bag, my coat, everything all around me had a layer of frost on it because the temperature dropped a little bit overnight to the frost point where all the moisture in the air decided it wanted to cling to something and freeze. You know, when winter camping, one of the main safety points is to stay dry. And there's the obvious stuff like not wading through water or getting snowed or rained on, but then there's the stuff that you don't really think about, like frost forming on you and all your stuff overnight. So, footwear. On this trip, I wore my Baffin Sequoias. I've worn them on a couple trips before, but this particular hike was very, very aggressive on my feet because, like I said, there's a lot of ups and downs and trying not to slip on the ice. When you get footwear for hiking, depending on how badly your feet get the crap beat out of them, your feet will actually swell, which is why it's always important to get like a half size or full size larger than what you would normally wear. One thing I learned is that I definitely probably could have used a boot that was a half size larger than what I have, because obviously this particular hike beat the crap out of my feet far more than any of the other hikes that I've been on, so my feet swelled up a little bit more, and I definitely felt it. My feet definitely felt a little bit constricted in my boots on this trip, and that played a very painful role going up and down the steep climbs because my toes were actually buttoned up against the tip of my boots. And it was so bad to the point that my toes, my big toes, actually got bruised. To the point where for the first day or two after that trip, I was actually concerned that my toenails might actually fall right off. Thankfully they haven't, and they're starting to heal. But yeah, that's definitely one of the closest times I've ever come to having toenail issues like that. I've mentioned it in other videos, but I just wanted to iterate it again. It's okay if things don't go according to plan, and you have to be able to adapt, right? So obviously, with this trip, I had the intent of, there's a 30-kilometer loop, and I only wound up making it 8 kilometers into the trail before I had to call it quits. That day I had intended on doing 10, basically split the trail over 3 days, 10 kilometers a day, 30 kilometers. But I was like absolutely wrecked, and I hit my cutoff time of 4 o'clock when I eventually got to the place where I set up camp. But rather than foolishly try to continue the trip when I was concerned about not having enough time to finish it, I correctly made the decision to call it quits there and just hike back out the next day. I learned some important lessons about my limits, I learned about the trail, and most importantly, looking at it positively, I still had a successful overnight where I got to camp out, practice setting up a campfire in wet conditions, as much of a type 2 fun situation as that was. And I'm not letting it deter me from going on future trips. Like, if you take a look at some of my earlier trips and you watch the progression, I mean, yeah, I bomb out of half of them, but look at how much I've learned and how much I've improved. And that's because when my trip craps the bed, I don't give up. I'm just like, whatever, we'll fix it next time. So yeah, that's about it. That's everything from that trip that I really wanted to talk about, and hopefully this has been of some value to you guys who are interested in winter camping or backpacking. All things considered, I had a lot of fun, and there's definitely quite a few trips in the pipeline for this coming year. And if you're interested in any of the winter camping gear that I use, there's some Amazon affiliate links in the description, so check those out. If you are new to the channel, I like to combine traditional outdoors experiences with fun futuristic tech, like on this particular trip, using 3D printed gear, like the carabiner I used for my bear hang and the funnel that I used for my boiled snow water. Check out my other videos and consider subscribing if that seems interesting. That's it for this one, guys. I'll catch you next video.